What's up, guys? I'm Joe. Today I am finally talking about my favorite albums of 2017. So 2017 was actually a really great year for music. There's a lot of great stuff. I found this list pretty hard to make, actually. There were a lot of albums from bands that I was, very much anticipating, as well as albums from bands I never would have expected to like as much as I do. So you see a good mix of both on my list. There's some stuff on here from before I started my channel. I didn't start the channel till May, so there are some things I hadn't reviewed. And you could check out a list of some honorable mentions below, stuff that almost made the list, stuff that was maybe on the list and got pushed off for some other things. Basically, the way I do this, my ratings from previous reviews come into play. But this list, it more so becomes what I went back to over and over again, more and more. So it's not necessarily the case that these are going to be ranked just how I ranked them originally. So I'm going to be doing my top 20. I'm going to run through a couple of these a little bit quicker, maybe say a couple words. Then once we get to 15 or so, I'll talk about them a little bit more in depth. So yeah, without further ado, number 20, Roger Waters, Is This the Life We Really Want? This is an album that surprised me, and I ended up, liking it quite a lot. I hadn't really paid that much attention to Roger Waters' solo stuff all that much after Pink Floyd, but, this album really hooked me in. There was a lot of Pink Floyd kind of feel to it, but I think for the most part what I really liked about it was how inspired Waters felt. You can definitely hear, the politics on here, and just hear how disgruntled he is with a lot of things going on in society, and, it lends itself to some very, beautiful sounding music at times. I mean, look at, that little middle section of Deja Vu, it just with that very nice piano part. It's just some great stuff. Moving on, number 19, we have Death from Above with Outrage Is Now. An album I wasn't all that into the first couple times I listened to it, but the more I did, the more it kind of just started to stick. It's one of those bands where it's just the bass and the drums. It's very straightforward, but at the same time just very hard rocking. There's a lot of good punk elements on here. There's a lot of good hard rock elements on here. You're really getting, quite a lot. The first and last track are some big standouts for me. You have Nomad, and starting the album, Holy Books ending the album. Just some very hard-hitting riffs, lots of great energy going on in those songs, and throughout most of the album. Number 18, Stone Sour, Hydrograd. I've been a pretty, somewhat of a Stone Sour fan. I don't think they're the greatest band ever, but I always thought they were pretty solid, with their, double album, The House of Golden Bones, being probably their best work. What I like about Hydrograd is, it's very big on just going into their influences, as far as, 80s heavy metal, stuff like that. Some Judas Priest, Slayer, Metallica, that kind of stuff. You're hearing a lot of that on here. Big catchy hooks, some hard-hitting riffs. Song number 3, very commercial sounding, but just a, damn catchy song. As always, Corey Taylor giving a fantastic performance on the vocals, a personal favorite of mine being the Witness Trees. Just a nice drive to it, and again, just the vocals from Corey coming in very strong on that track. Number 17, we have Richie Kotzen with Salting Earth. Richie Kotzen, just probably the most underrated guitar player out there. I was turned on to him when, the Winery Dogs came out a couple years ago. Richie plays in that band with Billy Sheehan and Mike Portnoy. As far as the solo stuff goes, he's got, 20-something solo albums at this point. All of them, pretty fantastic. He usually, delves into some bluesy stuff, some, fusion-y territory. If you want to hear just some great shredding riffs, look at songs like End of Earth. But at the same time, he has some soul-inspired cuts with more piano-driven music, such as My Rock. And look towards the songs such as Make It Easy for, the typical kind of Kotzen, bluesy, rocker kind of thing. He's got a fantastic singing voice as well. Up next, number 16, Royal Blood, How Did We Get So Dark? Royal Blood, a band I was very excited about when they came out with their debut album a couple years ago. Similar to Death from Above, implementing just that bass and drum dynamic. That first album was, filled with very hard-hitting, heavy moments, which was cool. This one, scales that back a little bit. You're getting more into a groovy kind of territory. They definitely had an ear out for melody on this one, very much focusing in on that as well. But you get your fair share of grinding riffs as well. Look at songs like Hook, Line, and Sinker or Lights Out that are similar to that first album, but then, you get some different kind of things such as Hole in Your Heart, or even I Only Lie When I Love You, which just has this great groove to it. Number 15, we have Cloak with To Venomous Depths. A band that I just happened to stumble upon towards the end of the year, and that just really caught my ear when I was listening to them. They're very much getting lumped into that black and roll type of thing. You're seeing a lot of comparisons drawn to Tribulation, which, some people think maybe, Tribulation probably does that sound better. Personally for me, I find Cloak has a lot of like those new wave of British heavy metal influence as well. All that black metal sound is there, especially with the harsh kind of vocals. There's a lot of like epic, uplifting sounding guitars and stuff like that you would hear in those kind of 80s heavy metal bands. This band actually kind of reminds me of Ghost a lot. Maybe a little heavier, more like Ghost's first album. I feel you could easily throw on a clean vocal on this and it would sound very similar to Ghost. So just overall, a very nice debut metal record from this band, Cloak from Georgia. Highly recommend, definitely check it out. Number 14, we're totally switching gears and we have the self-titled debut solo album from Harry Styles from One Direction. An album I never thought would make it on any sort of list of mine, but the surprise factor alone was enough to pique my interest. You see him really going into a rock direction here and owning it very well. As far as the rock influence goes, you're hearing the Beatles and the Stones and Bowie and Elton John, stuff like that. And while those influences are very apparent, I just think they work very well and they still sound original here. And his voice is just fantastic and it works very well at these songs. So like I said, a big surprise for me, but an album I've just found myself going back to over and over. I think a favorite for mine would be the song Only Angel, just because of that, very nice groove going on there. That Stones kind of vibe to it. Another standout for me, Kiwi, just, hits hard. It's got like a Jet kind of feel to it. So overall, like I said, just a surprisingly great album from Harry Styles. I'm very excited to see where he goes next. Number 13, another surprise one for me would be Lorde Melodrama. Another surprise because I really wasn't a big fan of Lorde when that first album came out. But then, I heard Green Light before this album came out, and that really just kind of caught my ear, the sort of energy and uplifting sound of that chorus. So, it piqued my interest enough to check out the album. Sure enough, it's just a very, expertly constructed pop record. And it's different from what you're hearing out there right now, generally. Compare that to someone like Taylor Swift who, with Reputation really just went for like the typical modern sound. Lorde just does her own thing and she owns it and she does it very well. Green Light is a big standout for me. I'm also a big fan of Homemade Dynamite. I like how, personal she gets on these songs such as Liability. And the album ends with Perfect Places, which is just a huge, uplifting hit. Great way to end the album. Up next, number 12, we have Queens of the Stone Age with the album Villains. This was one of my more anticipated ones of the year, coming off of the album like Clockwork, which was just, one of my favorites by them. Just a phenomenal record. I was very interested to see where they would go next, and they do, change it up quite a bit. Songs such as Feet Don't Fail Me and The Way You Used to Do have more of a dancey kind of feel to it. But there's no shortness of that kind of psychedelic, deserty rock type thing that they're accustomed to that you heard on like Clockwork. Songs such as Fortress and Unreborn Again have a very trippy kind of driving sound to them. And then you have an epic track such as The Evil Has Landed, just hit you over the head with these great, crunchy, garagey sounding riffs. That one sort of reminded me of a Them Crooked Vultures song, that side project with Josh Homme, Dave Grohl, John Paul Jones. Which they should definitely come out with another record. But overall, Villains turned out to be a pretty great album. Fortress, probably a personal favorite of mine on here, just because it kind of has that like Clockwork sound to it. I like the kind of psychedelic nature of the sounds on there. Up next, number 11, Mastodon with Emperor of Sand. An album that, following the more kind of trippy psychedelic Once More Around the Sun, takes that and adds a bit of their previous sort of heaviness into it. There's a lot of hard-hitting riffs on here to go with those kind of psychedelic moments. Huge standouts here such as Jaguar God that ends the album and, starts sort of in a folky kind of way before going into just those hard-hitting kind of older Mastodon-type riffs. And something I did really enjoy about this album is the drummer Bran. I was never the biggest fan of his vocals in this band, which, they started to integrate him more and more in the last couple of records. I just preferred, Troy and Brent's, grittier sounds. But, on this album, Emperor of Sand, Bran's vocals are really, coming into their own. Like, he's really owning it as a singer on here and just, adding great, depths in the sound to this band. A song like Steam Breather, like, his vocals are just fantastic, very high, very soaring. A song like Sultan's Curse gets things off to a very energetic start, some really great riffs and a great groove on there. A song like Andromeda just, hits you over the head with these great, dissonant riffs that kind of harken back to a previous Mastodon. Just overall, a really great album, one of my favorite metal releases of the year. Now we're in the top 10. Number 10, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard with Flying Microtonal Banana. This band has come out with 5 albums this year, all of which are pretty great in their own right. I was, really torn between putting this one on and Polygon Wanoland, another great one as well. But, something about this album still just really clicks with me the most. They're experimenting with this microtonal tuning, which creates these very eerie, Eastern influence type sounds. A song like Open Water, that kind of Eastern dominance really shines. You have songs like Nuclear Fusion, which have this great, kick-ass groove to it. And moments like Rattlesnake with that kind of straight-ahead rock and roll type style that, you've come accustomed to with King Gizzard, but having those microtonal instruments give it a, just a different vibe. Number 9, we have Converge, The Dusk and Us. Another one of my favorite metal releases of the year. I mean, this album just beats you over the head and does not stop, except for maybe The Dusk and Us, which is a lighter track that kind of breaks things up. But overall, you just have these great, fantastic, heavy moments. The vocalist, Jacob Bannon, his kind of tortured style, that anguish-type vocal, just adds to the intensity of these songs so well. You're just really feeling what's going on here. And as I mentioned in my review of this album, I love the way the drums really accent the guitars in this album. The drums, add a, they're not just quite laying down the beat, they're adding this kind of percussive element to it that just really hits hard and just really accents the riffs very well. You have some great, hardcore punk influence moments, such as Broken by Light or Cannibals. You have the excellent bass-driven song Trigger with these eerie guitar patterns on top. And two of my favorites, one of them being Arkhipov Calm, which has this cool, War Pigs kind of kind of thing to it, which is pretty cool. And then, it ends with Reptilian, which is just this onslaught of riff after riff, just great stuff. So overall, like I said, one of my favorite metal releases of the year. Number 8, we have Foo Fighters' Concrete and Gold. Now, I'm a huge Foo Fighters fan. They're one of my favorite bands, so maybe this is the inner fanboy in me. But whatever. I know a lot of people weren't quite that happy with this one. They felt that it was just kind of very standard Foo Fighters, weren't really doing much different. And I really kind of just disagree with that. I mean, I thought they were more so going into their, kind of 70s rock influences than they ever had before, which made for a pretty fun album. Singles such as Run and Sky's Neighborhood are still big standouts for me. Run has that really great heavy riff to it. Sky's Neighborhood just has just a huge, very catchy chorus. Probably one of the more sing-along type Foo Fighters choruses there are. And a big standout for me on here is definitely the song Arrows. I just think that chorus hits really hard. Has a lot of power to it. Dave Grohl's vocal really adds to that sort of, epic, soaring feeling to it. And then you have some fun, just kind of, 70s rock-infused moments, such as Make It Right and La-Di-Da. La-Di-Da, very Zeppelin-inspired and just, straight-ahead bluesy kind of rock, which I really do find just fun. Up next, number 7, we have Kendrick Lamar, Damn. I'm not the biggest rap fan in the world, but, Kendrick, a couple years ago when To Pimp a Butterfly came out, really opened me up to a lot of new music. I grew up playing the trumpet, so I played, in a lot of jazz bands. Those jazzy, funky kind of sounds into Pimp a Butterfly really caught my attention because I just thought it was something different than what I had usually been hearing with modern rap. And then you start to really dig into Kendrick's lyrics and stuff like that, and, that turned out to be just one of my favorite albums of that year, and my favorite albums probably of this decade. So then when Damn came around, I was pretty excited. Overall, it just proves to be a pretty great album as well. It's definitely not as intricate as To Pimp a Butterfly. There's not as much to really dive into. But it doesn't mean there aren't just some great songs on here. DNA has a lot of great energy to it. Humble, one of the biggest singles of the year. Just has a great beat. I love that little piano line. Some personal favorites probably being the song Duckworth and especially the song Feel. I love the very laid-back sound to it. There's not really as much going on in this album, like I said. There's a lot of kind of introspective moments where Kendrick is looking within, and I find that stuff to be really compelling. And on Feel, just the rapping gets more and more intense, even though, this very mellow beat is going on. It makes for a nice little dynamic there. Number 6, Rise Against Wolves. This album, I feel like it hasn't gotten very much attention this year. I personally really enjoyed. I think it's a step up from the last album, The Black Market, bringing back a little bit more of that intensity as far as the punk sound goes. The song Wolves gets things off to a really great start. I like how the song just kind of jumps right in and you're just, you're just going. That chorus is just really, really huge. There's a lot of huge moments like that on here. What comes to mind is the big chanting, slow driving part of Parts Per Million, or otherwise the middle section of How Many Walls with a, very cool riff going on there. There's a lot of riffs on this album, which, Rise Against isn't quite accustomed to, but I found that to be pretty cool. And there's some great, just very punky moments, such as Welcome to the Breakdown, which, reminds me of a 90s punk style. Up next, number 5, we have St. Vincent with Masseduction. Annie Clark, also known as St. Vincent, who's a little more accustomed to the weirder side of things, comes with a more pop-focused album than what we usually get, but nonetheless very effective. I love the way she really blends like an electronic kind of sound with, very grungy, dirty style guitar in a lot of these. Look at songs such as Los Angeles for that, or Masseduction, the title track. You have great, very subdued, even haunting type moments such as Hang On Me or Happy Birthday Johnny, which is probably my favorite of the album, where her vocals, just really sell the song. And you're just getting a very personal side of her, and you can just hear it in her voice that you don't typically get with a St. Vincent album. And I just think that works incredibly well. I've gone back to this album over and over again. Another standout is the song Pills, which I wasn't, too into when I first heard it. I thought that hook was kind of weird, but it kind of makes sense in the context of the song. But then, what I really like about it is when it kind of breaks down and that, slow driving outro comes in. It's just a very lush sounding section. All this instrumentation. Then you have Kamasi Washington come in on the saxophone at the end. It's just fantastic. Alright, number 4, we have Nothing But Thieves with Broken Machine. It's the second album from this band. I was a big fan when that self-titled record came out. I was actually able to see them when the album was released, which was pretty cool. They put on a great live show. What I like about this album is they sort of doubled down on all the things that worked on the first one. Some of the rock type sounds, rock a little harder. Even some of the dance electronic type elements, they go in even deeper with that. Look at that song like Live Like Animals, which has a lot of dance type vibe to it, but just, hits really hard. It's a really fun song. There's a great groove to it. You have some fantastic ballads on here. Particles is a favorite of mine on here, and Connor Mason's vocals just really shine on here. He really is a fantastic singer. And even then, the melody of that song is just so fantastic. Like I said, you have some big, huge rocking moments like I'm Not Made by Design, which has this great build-up to it. Starts very, kind of quiet, kind of menacing, and just explodes to a really huge chorus. So like I said, when they rock really hard on this one, or when they're experimenting with more electronics, they do that. Number 3, we have Black Country Communion with BCC4. This is a supergroup featuring Glenn Hughes on vocals, who is well known for his work with Deep Purple and a lot of his solo material. Joe Bonamassa, a very virtuoso blues guitarist. Jason Bonham on the drums, Derek Sherinian on the keyboards. And this is their 4th offering, one that comes after a bit of an extended hiatus. What I really like about this album is it sounds like the most cohesive one the band has done together. It feels like they have finally tapped into what their sound is. There also just seems to be a whole lot of energy going on this record. You could just feel the excitement, feel the passion of, they really wrote this thing in the studio, performed a lot of it live, and you could just feel that energy, just jumping off of the tracks here. I mean, look at a song like The Crow, which, just has these awesome heavy riffs. Kind of reminds you of Bulls on Parade by Rage Against the Machine. Before ultimately going into this very, expanded solo section, very similar to something Deep Purple would do, where the keyboards get the solo and the bass and the guitar, everyone really gets their moment to shine. And it just sounds like they're jamming and having a lot of fun with that. But then at the same time, there are these very carefully constructed tracks. Big standout for me, one of my favorite songs of the year, is the last song from My Resting Place, which Bonamassa takes the lead vocals on. Glenn Hughes is a phenomenal vocalist, but Bonamassa usually sings on at least one, because he does when he does his solo stuff. I never thought he was the best vocalist, but I feel like on this song he really, shines. It offers a sort of kind of epic tale to it. The music is really fantastic with this sort of folky or Celtic kind of feel to it. The number 2 spot, we have Powertrip, Nightmare Logic. This is the band's second release, but they just came onto my radar this year with this album. Just overall a very fun metal record. I love listening to this album. I've listened to it so many times throughout the year. The 80s thrash metal influences are just obviously huge on this album. You get a lot of Slayer vibes, maybe early Metallica. Also a lot of Anthrax. I mean, look at the song Executioner's Tax. That kind of gang, shouty vocal thing reminds me of Anthrax, or maybe even Overkill, bands like that. Songs like Firing Squad and Crucifixion just hit you over the head with these pummeling thrash riffs, heavy, fast drums. I like the sort of production on the vocals. It gives it a very vintage sound. But then there's also moments that just have these immense grooves on that, such as the track Nightmare Logic. I mean, it's one of those typical thrash, open note type songs, but they change it up a little bit, adding that little bit of groove, that dun 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 dun. Then you have a song like Waiting Around to Die, which just have these very monumental, epic sounding riffs to it. I feel like if a song like that came out in the 80s, it would definitely stand the test of time, just having these great riffs to it. And finally, number 1, I gotta give it to Paramore, After Laughter. This is easily the album I've listened to the most over the year. When it first came out, I thought it was like a good, summer type sound. It came out, I think, in May. It was a good way to set off the summer. But then, even going into the winter, I just feel like it took on a whole different kind of life. What I talked about in my review, what I liked about it, is this kind of happy, bouncy sounding music, juxtaposed to these kind of more personal, maybe a little darker lyrics. I feel like you can listen to it a bunch of different ways. You can listen to it for the fun, upbeat music, or you can listen to it to kind of reflect upon the lyrics. Going into the colder part of the year, I just felt like it took on a whole different, type of meaning. So that was really cool. And then just all around, really great songs. I wasn't the biggest fan of Paramore until more recently. I got into them more with the self-titled record. So I really like to see this, different kind of sound they've been going into. I think, they're at their best now. Songs like Hard Times and Rose-Colored Boy are just undeniable hits. Fake Happy as well, just with these immense hooks. Haley's vocals on this album are phenomenal. A very cool musical sound as well, harkening back to a sort of 80s type pop. In a year where a lot of rock bands went pop, and this being one of them, I think they pulled it off really well. Because it's not done in a kind of way to just conform to what's going on nowadays. It's kind of going backwards and taking in that 80s kind of feel. And even like a 90s type sound in some areas. I mean, look at something like Caught in the Middle, almost has like a No Doubt kind of vibe to it. And I think sort of like an underrated moment on here is Idol Worship. I really do like that song. I think the lyrics hit really hard and very personal. And it also has a bit more of a rock edge like their older stuff does. But like I said, easily the album that I've gone back to the most and really haven't stopped listening to. So yeah, After Laughter, taking the number 1 spot of the year. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what your favorite albums of the year are. Don't forget to subscribe, check out some other videos. Yeah, once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.